Welcome back to God's Lawyer Podcast. What's it mean to say that someone's a tent-making pastor? Let's do this. Let's take a glimpse, a little behind-the-scenes look. I did this a few episodes ago. Got a lot of positive feedback on it. A lot of friends sending texts, phone calls, saying they enjoyed it. So here's what I want to do in this episode. I want to kind of, if you will, kick back for just a second. Let's talk about a week in the life of a tent-making pastor.
There's not a time zone in which he's not being praised. Listen to me, there is not a moment since the resurrection of Jesus where there's not someone somewhere declaring that Jesus saved.
Well, I do hesitate to really kind of get into a lot about me. That is not my default. Actually, as an introvert, I feel more uncomfortable the more I'm talking about myself. The more I become the center of attention, the less comfortable I feel. I actually feel very, very comfortable just grabbing a book, sitting maybe with a friend or two, talking, having a conversation. But I know that many of you had received a blessing, kind of the behind-the-scenes look, kind of my journey through the educational world. So over the past 6 months, I've transitioned intentionally into what I call a tent-making role. And you say, what do you mean by tent make? Do you actually make tents? That's funny. I don't think about it sometimes, but those outside of, if you will, the ecclesia, the ecclesiastical bubble outside the church, would probably wonder, so you sell or make tents? Well, no, I'm using the example of Paul. So here Paul is, he's if you will, called. He's an apostle. He's a prophet, a preacher, evangelist, kind of serving as a pastor to pastors. In other words, he's full-time, vocationally serving the Lord. But also there are times, because it's not like that he's employed getting a paycheck per se. So there are times when you see he's using a vocational skill that he has, and for him it was making tents in the marketplace, and he's using that not only as a means to provide for himself. Of course, there's this whole question about whether Paul was married or not. That's a whole nother episode, whole nother debate. I know some immediately default that he wasn't. Was he a widow? I don't know, but again, just a little food for thought. You ought to dig in a little deeper on that question. And so as he's going about, he's really serving, and now people have said bivocational. I think that, with all due respect, I think that's absolutely an ignorant way to refer to pastors who also have a job where they're earning income, either all of their income, part of their income, some of their income, outside of the church. I think that's a really, it's a pathetic way of describing faithful men who, whether they're working as a plumber or whether they're working as a school teacher, it doesn't matter. In that job during the day, they don't sign off from being a pastor. Now, I'm blessed. I'm pastoring a church where the church, at its inception, asked if I would be interested in only working for the church. And part of the agreement that I asked for coming in was, and so a group of people, they started a church, reached out to me, asked me if I'd be willing to be considered to be the pastor of the church. I told them I'd be praying about it. I had some specific things that I was asking for. And one of those things that my wife and I prayed about was, could we have a period of time where I would then go and work as a lawyer and also work as the pastor of the church? Now, my calling, my vocation is to be a pastor. The Lord has provided me an opportunity to be a lawyer, and I believe to do good for His kingdom, but also to be a blessing to my family and to be a blessing to the church. So the past 6 months, I've experienced quite a bit of change. Now, good change. I'm celebrating. I'm excited about where the Lord has me today. I'm just excited about some of the things that are happening in my life. I'm really happy. I told my wife the other day that I'm the happiest that I really can remember. I mean, for years. I really am. Just a lot of great things happening. Got a lot of great friends around me. So let's talk about the life and a week in the life of a tent-making pastor. So the next time you meet a pastor who works 2 jobs, don't be a jerk. It's like a guy I met a couple weeks back. He was one of these guys. You can always tell the guy that wasn't cool in high school, but he's trying to be cool now that he's like 45. So it's, if you're that guy, please stop. It's always a pathetic display. We all see right through it. So he asked me what I did. No, that's a thing with guys. I don't know. It's some sort of like, some sort of pissing match. I think it's like, what do you do? You know, it's almost like asking a guy like, how much money do you make? You know, what car do you drive? You know, is your wife beautiful? You know, it's stupid stuff that men say to each other. It's like trying to figure out like who's the big dog in the yard kind of thing. And so I said, well, I have two jobs. I'm a pastor. That's my calling, and really that's 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. I'm always on call. And I said, I'm also a lawyer. I work as a lawyer in downtown Tampa, and I spend a lot of time with clients and trying to help people understand their constitutional rights. Also, dealing with family members of clients, dealing with the public, dealing with other lawyers, dealing with judges, court officials. There's a lot of people I'm dealing with any given week. So what does that look like? I hear a lot of people they think it's funny. They'll make comments to me like something like this. What does being a pastor and being a lawyer have to do with each other? Aren't those worlds just totally opposite? And what you have there is somebody who means well. They just don't know what they're talking about. They have no idea. And so in their mind, a pastor, he's kind of like, he's Friar Tuck minus the drinking problem. You know, he's just kind of this goofy fat guy that shows up at the hospital. He's naive, and he prays for you, but he's kind of naive and gullible. You really don't expect a whole lot from him. The goal is to get someone to show up. Hey, if this guy will at least deliver a halfway decent message on Sunday, he better be there when I call when I've got a bunion on my foot and I'm at the doctor. You know, that sort of thing. So that's the problem, is that's the perception most people have. Either that or he's some sort of politician. You know, he's trying to climb the political ladder in his denominational life. He's the guy that, he never had a hard day of work in his life. There aren't any calluses on his hands, that kind of thing. So that image of a pastor, and then you get the image of a lawyer, right? So the image of a lawyer, maybe it's rightfully deserved, but it's usually very negative. Of course, until you need one, it's always negative till you need a lawyer. Then when you need a lawyer, you're absolutely looking for the best. You're looking for the guy or gal who knows the system so well that they're very fluent in both the law and the system. That is the procedures of the courtroom, the practices of law. But the image of a lawyer is usually somebody who's just in it for the money, somebody who's fast-talking, who bends the rules, who's unethical. But it's interesting, is actually what I've noticed over the years is that lawyers have a higher standard of ethics when practicing the law. Now, I'm not saying they're all ethical outside of the practice of law, nor am I saying they're all ethical within the practice of law. In fact, every month, the Florida Bar puts out a newspaper, and it has all the lawyers who've been disciplined or disbarred. It publishes it every month. So the Supreme Court of Florida, if a lawyer is punished or disbarred or suspended or publicly reprimanded, it's posted in the monthly newspaper put out by the Florida Bar. So you see it. So you recognize there are some who break those rules, but the vast majority play by the rules. There's very high ethical standards. I would argue that the ethical standards in practice, in the actual practice of law, are many times, this is a sad statement, but many times much higher than that of pastors. Many pastors learn the legal system of the church, which looks something like this: is a lot of gossip, a lot of backbiting, backstabbing, two-face, lying nonsense. And so that's the world they function and operate in, and there's usually very little consequence for something like that. You lie in a court of law, that's perjury, and you can lose your law license for something like that. You misrepresent something. The other thing is that many pastors learn this idea that emotions can drive. You feel something and you feel it in your spirit, and then it becomes fact. Well, that isn't how it works in the law. So in many respects, I have a higher regard for lawyers than I do pastors. You say, wait a minute, but you're a pastor. Well, it's inside baseball. So here's what it looks like for me. So I'm dealing with a lot of people on any given day. I'm dealing with with church members. I'm taking a phone call. I'm receiving an email. Oftentimes, many nights of the week, Jamie and I will have dinner with families from the church. Now that we have community groups, we're planning to start attending community groups. I have various leadership meetings throughout the week. Of course, we have church Wednesday night and Sunday morning, but that for us, that's the gathering of the church. So it's going on in my life all throughout the week. I have basically two sermons to prepare every week. That's substantial to do. That's not something I take lightly. Then there's my own prayer life, spending time praying for, interceding for the saints, also calling and encouraging, and trying to pour in and disciple those that have been entrusted to my care, trying to love sacrificially my wife, leading my family well, trying to stay connected with a few friends. It's vast. It's overwhelming. So here, and it can be overwhelming at times. Not overwhelming in a negative way, but overwhelming in like a good way. So here's what it looks like. Here's what my week looks like. I get up on Sunday morning. It's the first day of the week. That's right. Sunday's the first day of the week, and I'm excited. Get to gather with the saints. I get there a little bit early. We have something called the King's Table. Prior to that, I meet with a few men, and we pray. We pray together every Sunday morning. We pray for the service. We pray for each other. We pray for our community, and it's a special time. There's depending on the Sunday, there's usually 5 of us that participate, and that's a great way to start my week. I get up. Usually Sunday's a day to sleep in. Get to sleep in till about 5:30, 6 o'clock. Get up and begin to prepare to gather with the saints. It's a beautiful way to start the week. Every Sunday, we go out to lunch with families from the church, and that is a beautiful thing, just to be able to spend time, or we go over someone's house for lunch. And then we don't have a Sunday evening gathering, so that's usually time for me to spend with the family, just to kind of relax, hang out, have a good time. Well, Monday morning kicks up. It kicks up early. I mean bright and early. I get up at 4:30 through the week, get up early, and some people are really good about this. They get out of bed, and the first thing they do is they read their Bible or they pray. That's never worked for me very well. I can't do that first thing. I've got to get my bearings. And so in getting my bearings, as part of that is simply just to get ready. I like to go to the gym. We call it the gym. You call it the Y, a fitness center, whatever you want to call it. I like to go because it's in those times that whether I'm running a couple miles or I'm just kind of hitting the gym, just doing some training, things of that nature, just basically just to try to stay physically healthy. I don't have time. Gosh, I don't know where I would get the time to do anything other than just somewhat of like a 20 to 40 minute routine in the morning. So trying to do that, I began to make some connections. I'm going to a couple different places depending on where I have clients or my assignments are for the day for the firm I work for. So as I'm doing that, I have to plan my day to what local fitness center I'm going to go to based on where my clients are, where I need to be that day. And so I've got friends at a couple different places. So as you build routines, your guys are there, you get to talk to them, you kind of get to know them. And I've been encountering some Christian brothers. I've encountered some others who I've been able to share the gospel with. It wasn't too long ago. I encountered a young man who got pulled into basically what is a cult. We have a cult here. It's pretty big, the prosperity gospel cult. And this young man had watched on TV, left his family, moved here, was living out of his truck. And he seemed sincere, seemed like he had a good heart, a good spirit about him. And he was telling me that he'd come here because he'd felt God call him to come here to this church and go to some classes and live out of his truck. And I just openly rebuked him in love in the middle of the gym, the locker room, bunch of men in there. I just openly rebuked him. I said, look, you need to go back to your wife and your child. You need to go to work. You need to work hard. There's no way God would call you to leave your family to come here to this cult. And he said, I want to experience these amazing things from God. And I said, let me tell you something. The most amazing thing that you're going to experience from God is the salvation in Jesus Christ. Go back to your family, preach that gospel in your community, and stop looking for the sensationalized nonsense. Because there's no way you could convince me that God would call you to leave your family and come here. And he went back and sent me a text later on after he got back that he was back and getting reconnected, resettled, and trying to work hard to do that. And I commend him for that. So making some friendships. I always get to the office early, or if I'm assigned different places where my clients are. I'll go there. I like to get there early. I like to be one of the first people there if possible. There's a few other people that I can't get there before them because, they just get there unbelievably early. I like to get in the office, open up my Bible, I usually got a couple books with me. I've got I don't use a devotion, but I basically have this worship guide here. I've mentioned it before, probably on the podcast, Be Thou My Vision, a liturgy for daily worship. Also keep a couple of these books there. Brought these from the office, actually. I've got Creeds, Confessions, and Catechisms, a reader's edition. Fount of Heaven, Prayers from the Early Church. I've got a few others on prayer that I keep there. I always keep a Bible. I keep one of the Bibles that I'm writing stuff in for my kids. I've got one back here as well. Got a couple of these resources. This is another prayer book I keep at the office. I've got a Bible. I've got Bibles for my children. I write in the columns in those. And so what I'll do is I'll pick a section that I'm reading, and I'll write something in it. Here's something from April 2023. So I've been doing this for a while, and it's just different sections. I'm basically trying to fill up the columns with notes, little words of encouragement to my children. I don't know when I'm going to give it to them someday, but I'll read through the scriptures, and then I keep two different journals with me so that I can write down some thoughts and prayers for the day, some things that I'm thinking through. And one's more of a here's where I'm at spiritually, here's what I'm praying through, here's what I'm thinking through. I hope that will encourage me, but also encourage my children later on. And then I keep one with kind of projects, ideas I'm thinking through that I'm working on. They kind of help me when I've got those juices flowing. So really, I've been up a couple hours before I get into kind of more my Bible reading and my time of prayer. That leads me to a place where I always keep I've got this black notebook with me. I always keep this with me, and what I'll do is I'll write out the scriptures in here. Some people say, how do you write your sermon notes? Well, this is really kind of a behind-the-scenes look here today. So what I do when I write out sermon notes, I don't write out a manuscript. And so, for example, in this book here, I'm looking on this page, and what I do is I write out the text, and I write the verses, but I'll leave anywhere for 2 to 4 blank lines between. As I'm writing the verses, I'll leave spaces, and I'll pick right back up. So that way, when I come through, and as I'm studying the text, I can then write in notes in and around, for example, maybe what that particular word, kind of the range of meaning, its use, particular contextual issues, things of that nature, some applications, some theological points. Where does this line up in redemptive history? And so it can kind of it almost looks like a playbook more than anything. So it's actually not a manuscript. So I keep this with me. I think it's good to do that because in the morning I will take and I'll have, whether it's a theological resource, a theological dictionary, maybe a commentary. Now I'm putting some of them on my Kindle reader so that I can just pop them up on my laptop. So I do keep some of the books with me, and I'll kind of work through. So I try to do a little bit each morning to work through. Sometimes it's 15 minutes, sometimes it's an hour and a half or 2 hours that I get in the morning based on my schedule before I clock in at the tent making job. So I'll work through that. It's important because as I'm working through it, I keep this red book. Now I've got a brown one I'm switching to because this is 1 Timothy, so I'm almost done. I've almost memorized 1 Timothy all the way through. I'm just a few verses short, but what I've done is I've written out the verses in here, and I'm highlighting them, and I keep this. Whenever I take a break, whenever I go on lunch, wherever I go, I'll take this with me. So if you ever see me carrying this red one, and I also have a brown one, I used to have a black one when I was memorizing Ephesians, Jonah, and Hebrews. The idea is I keep that with me all the time because I think one of the most important things in preaching is that you would absorb the word. So while I'm memorizing the text, I'm doing that long before I'm reading any source material or checking words or word meaning or the text or looking for insights from scholars or theologians. I'm working through that for a long time ahead, memorizing and thinking through the text. And by the time you get into, for example, in Timothy, I'm into chapter 6, wrapping up the end of chapter 6, and I've been working through memorizing each paragraph, working through it. My brain is thinking 1 Timothy. It's thinking the sum total, the flow, the different aspects of the text. So by the time I read a commentary, it's almost as if I'm saying, okay, well, I've already recognized that. I've noticed that in the text. There's just nothing can replace in your study just being so familiar with the text that you're just breathing it out. I think about sermons where you just pick up a text and you start writing on a manuscript. To me, that's a talk. A sermon is something you're embodying, something that you're literally breathing it out almost. So I keep that with me. Like I said, I'll drag around a couple commentaries. I've got this huge, it almost looks like a suitcase bag. There were some people following me down the elevator one time, thought it was a suitcase that I had luggage, but it's because there's so many books in it. Because when I get lunch, on my lunch, I use lunch to study. I always have a book with me, always. I've mentioned this other podcast. I will study. I make that a point. But on my way to work and on my way home from work, something else I'm doing now, many times I will use those to make pastoral phone calls, depending now on the way in, very seldom because most people aren't up during that time. But on the way home, I usually almost at least 2 to 3 days a week, sometimes every day, I'll make at least 1 to 2 phone calls on my way home, whether it's somebody who maybe just needs a word of encouragement, or there's an issue or leadership discussion that needs to happen. It's kind of like the mobile office. That happens at lunchtime too a lot. It happens during the day. If that's, I need to take a quick break, I can, get a moment, a break in my day. I take 10, 15 minutes, make a phone call, send a message. We have Telegram, so it's great. I can send a lot of messages and keep up what's going on throughout the day. But on my way in and my way out, when I don't have phone calls to make, I use Audible. And I keep books on there, and a lot of times I do not read theological books via Audible. You say, well, you're not reading them anyway, you're listening to them. Okay, so I can listen to someone else read it to me, or I can read it to myself, whatever. Don't split hairs. That's absurd. And so what I try to do with that time is I particularly hone in on historical works, whether it's a biography, an autobiography, or just a work of history. I find it to be refreshing, really just keep my brain engaged on these things. Now throughout the day, Monday through Friday, throughout the day, I'm studying. I've got cases before me, so I'm doing research on the law. I'm studying cases, case law. I'm looking through a whole host of things, looking through fact patterns, looking through procedural things, asking questions on, are there motions that can be submitted? Are there motions that need to be submitted? Are there clients that need to be called, visited, called back? And then I work on a team, so I'm in a division of attorneys. That means that there's work we share together. There's work we have to do together. I'm sharing cases, so I'm co-counsel on several other cases with attorneys who are more experienced in those particular cases, trying to learn there. I also do some shadowing because you're always trying to learn. And then if I don't have any work that's pressing or right in front of me that needs to be done right away, and if I get an hour or two, I'll go set through a trial, kind of watch, take notes, try to learn. So I'm always trying to learn, whether it's I'm studying the rules of evidence, I'm studying procedure, while I'm watching a case, looking through fact patterns in my own cases, trying to work through things, or I'm watching tutorials, videos, reading training materials. I'm always just trying to be educated so that I can be a better advocate for the client. Why? Because we have a constitution and everyone has the same constitutional rights that should be afforded to them. So I was thinking about that, and then what often happens is that each night, whether come straight home and have time with the family, or whether we meet and go out to dinner, or we meet with a family from church, a lot of times I'm incorporating also ministry activities, whether it's the Friday night football that we're going to and evangelizing at Friday night football. I think just this past week, I had the opportunity to go and speak at the Fellowship of Christian Athletes at a local high school on my way to work. So I'm incorporating a lot of that. Here recently, I've been blessed. I've had several young men at work, some young lawyers who've come to me. Some I've had come in, ask a young man, can I shut the door? Can we pray together? I had another young man came to me and said, hey, I'd like to talk to you more about the faith. Another young man said, hey, I want to come back to the faith. Can you talk to me about it? So here I am serving as a lawyer, but in private conversations, I'm being able to be a positive influence on these young men. I had a young lady, she's married and has several kids, and I told her, I said, you ought to pray about, really seeing what the Lord has. Maybe you might have, she's got several kids, she's got her hands full, she's working full time, husband works, she's got children, And I said, if that's where your heart is, you ought to pray and see if the Lord would lead you all to have more children. So they're actually pursuing that right now. She stopped by and said, just want to let you know you were a huge encouragement on that. My husband and I have been praying about it, thinking about it, and we're actually going to pursue that. So it's interesting. I've got a lot of people, because I'm a pastor in those roles, who are asking me questions and say, okay, what do you believe? What do you believe about this? What do you believe about that? I've had people attack my beliefs. I've had people try to take me on. Okay, that's all part of it. It's okay. It's no problem. I had a situation the other day. I realized that I was in court and realized that, unbeknownst to me, all the other officers of the court know that I'm a pastor. Now, it's not that I'm not trying to hide it. Absolutely not trying to hide it. But when you walk into the courtroom, first thing I'm saying is not, hey, I'm a pastor. Once I get to converse with you, I will let you know immediately once we start conversing. Let you know, hey, I'm the pastor. Here's what I do. This is who I am. But apparently the word had gotten around. I was pretty excited about that to know. It's of course interesting, because then you're obviously being watched, but that's a good thing. I think it's a blessing. But what I'm recognizing is that while I'm in the marketplace, like Paul. Now, I'm not like Paul. I don't mean that I'm on the same level as Paul and we're both sinners saved by grace. He said he was the foremost of sinners, okay? So what I've discovered is that there's an opportunity in the marketplace for me to be used by God as a pastor. So I'm a pastor of the church, but also recognizing in my evangelist role, I'm serving as a pastor to lost sheep. And I pray that God will use me to bring them either to the fold or back to the fold, whatever that looks like, okay? So, well, like the rest of you, I love Saturdays with my family. I love the weeknights with my family. Obviously, I'm not going to get into a lot of the details of that. There has to be some points where that's private. But I say this, if you notice, though, I think what we have to do is we have to set priorities. So my spiritual health, my physical health, my mental health, these are all, in my intellectual health, these are all important to me. Why? Because they're important to God. Because we're commanded. So whatever your job is, or how many jobs you have, certainly I'm going to tell you this. The Bible's clear that if anyone does not provide for his own relatives, especially members of his own household, he's denied the faith and worse than an unbeliever. So we are to work hard. But when I think about this, we're to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength. So I pray that God will give me the grace to continue to be faithful in what he's called me to, that I would be a light in a dark place. So there's just a little behind-the-scenes look of what it looks like to be a tent-making pastor. Well, until the nations are converted, no excuses. You might have to work 2, 3, 4 jobs. That's okay. No retreat and absolutely no surrender. Why? Because Jesus Christ is King.